Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're in the world. Welcome to the Wine Cellar. We said there might be some wine today. So today we are talking about the GBS Shared Services Trends, Benchmarks and Insights, the State of the Industry study by SSON Research Analytics. And I am just going to move a slide. Very pleased to have Tom Bangemann with us. You can see him in the middle between Josh and I. He's in the middle because we've got to keep him upright because he's getting old now, having all these eras of shared services and GBS. And he wrote the book. That's it, the book. He wrote the book, and Tom has kept his interest and is curating this survey every year. We're going to see more about these caterpillars shortly. I'm the one on the left. Josh is the one on the right. And Tom Bangemann is the guy with more job titles than you can shake a stick at. We've got to have to get him reducing a bit because there isn't enough real estate on the screens. So that's that. And now we are, as I say, we're in the wine cellar. We did say there might be a bit of wine tasting. So Tom brought some Portuguese wines for us to taste. I hope you've all got a glass with you. I think there's 300 of you, so I think it might be enough to go around. That came out of the cellar. Look at these, amazing. And of course, we don't drink alcohol during the working day, but just so you know, that's what would happen if we were. Right, so, thank you, Josh. So this is what we're going to cover. I'm just doing a brief introduction. Tom's going to dig into the 2025 research and what we can learn from that. Josh is going to dive into some of the data, and I'm just going to come back with a few thoughts on where we take that. And I say Q&A, it's going to be tight for Q&A, but if you do have questions, please pop it into the panel on GoToWebinar. Even if we don't get time to answer them today live, we will answer them by email in follow-up. So thank you for that. And with that, I shall pass, before I pass over, you have seen this story before, that 86.4% of all statistics are made up on the spot. This is apologies to Tom Fishburne because his particular quote was a little bit different, but this is clearly, this is a situation where they're not made up on a spot because Tom just doesn't think that fast. It's all come from the research, so just so you know. But with that, Tom, tell us what we learned.
All right, okay, thank you, Dan. So to start with, the first question would always be in any kind of presentation or discussion about GBS and its current trends, are we going to see this model remain and is it sustainable, or are we going to see some other model take over? Because if some other model would take over, then we can just finish the presentation now, right?
And get on to the wine.
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately for us, the answer is yes. You can see here on the slide that most people actually think it works, and even more people think it not only works, but they will increase their scope and keep using the model. So therefore, let's go through some details and see where we are currently with the GBS trends. So what I find interesting is, for example, this slide about naming strategy. So I'm not sure naming is a strategy, but if you look at what people call their organization, then you can see that nowadays GBS or something related to business services like company name, business services is the most popular version. There's still a lot who call it shared services. Often those are single function operations. Sometimes people call it shared service if they think it's less mature. It doesn't have to be, but that's how people often do it. But you can see there's a lot of creativity in this area, and more options are sort of coming up on this slide. So all of those are good. I think you should just call it something that makes sense in terms of what you're actually doing. Of course, it could be aspirational in the sense that you call it global business solutions, even if you're not there yet, but you want to get there. So that might also be a strategy for this. In terms of the sort of naming of things, we recently did a study in SSON about GCCs in India. And I think this is a topic that is somewhat irritating to some people, not because GCCs are not great operations, but because nobody really knows what it actually stands for. And you can see here different answers from different people when we ask them what they sort of think about when you ask them about a global capability center. And you can see on top of the list, we have most people thinking that GCCs are a mature competence center. So basically a center that is more mature than a typical transactional center. Unfortunately, on the bottom of the list, you also see that 8 people think exactly the opposite. Then in second place, you see people say, well, GCC is a center, whereas GBS is a model. And a lot of people agree with that also. However, you will also see that there is 13% of people who think exactly the opposite. So they think it's a model. And then in third place, you can see GCC and shared service center are the same. So then the question would be, why do we have different names for the same thing? And then in fourth place, we have, okay, GCC is something that is located in India. So if it's in India, then we call it GCC. And you could combine these things, of course, and then if you agree that GCC is a center that is in India and in most cases has more mature or more advanced content, then you probably get 80% of people sort of agree. So this is definitely a topic that is a little bit confusing. So hopefully this helps.
So GCC is in the Philippines as well.
That is true. So there are some centers, for example, in the Philippines who use GCC. I think they want to sort of marketing-wise lift their the perception about what they're doing. And again, that's not bad in any ways, but it is not helpful in terms of us understanding what we mean by GCC. This is something we did in SSON first time this year in this State of the Industry report. So basically what it looks at is how big is your GBS budget relative to your enterprise revenue. So let's say you're at 10 billion revenue, just to give you an example. And then on the left side, you see 40% of companies say their budget is below 0.5%. So that would be 50 million, if I calculate it correctly. So maybe they have 30 million, 40 million, 50 million budget for their GBS. And on the right side, you can see that a third of companies says their budget is 2% or more. So that would be 200 million or more. And the actual distribution of these results is actually significantly bigger. So there are some companies that would have 5%, 6%, 8%. So very sizable GBS organizations. Now it's just an indication of how large these GBS organizations are relative to the company size, which probably relates to the scope they cover and the amount of people they employ in GBS. So it's just a sort of indication of how relevant a GBS organization is within an enterprise. And then one of our favorite discussions lately is about this thing called value. So if you look at the service delivery models that exist, and we have one in SSON also, and in the middle of it, it says value, because in most models, it says value in the middle because it really is about value. The problem is just to define what the heck it is. I mean, what do you think is value? What does it stand for? Here we ask the question, you can ask this question different ways, but here we ask the question where people could tick off several options. I think this one gives you a good overview that almost everybody thinks part of this value is cost. It should be more than cost, because if it's only cost, then why don't we call it cost? But as you can see on this slide, most people think in addition to cost, there's something else like customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, labor arbitrage, whereas that is sort of cost also. The interesting pieces are the ones on the bottom of this list, brand improvement, growth in new markets, revenue improvement, because those things actually touch top line, whereas cost is related to, say, the margin point in the middle of the slide. So that's bottom line at the end. But if you do something that actually is closer to your core business and touches your top line, I think those are the things that we see increase on this slide.
And there's also an interesting point about cost optimization. If it's just cost optimization for GBS itself, that's one thing. But if it's cost optimization for the whole organization, whole business, that's a slightly different thing, which you could see as more value creating.
Yeah. So then we have some questions that we keep asking again and again and again. One of them is, what do you think your maturity level is? It's a self-assessment question, so people will think about how mature they are and answer accordingly. Some people might be right, some people might be wrong. You could criticize this because there's no clear definition on what maturity is and so on. So that's all fine. But having done this now in different pieces of research over many years, and we consistently get similar results, I think people are quite good at assessing how mature they are, even without us defining maturity in much detail. You can see here, it also doesn't change much. At the end of the day, what it means is you get a more or less standard deviation or standard sort of curve here, and you can see half the people are in the middle at medium, and then there's a quarter who are low and more or less a quarter who are high or expert. So that's a normal result you would get. But it also tells us that we are far from done in terms of GBS, the transformation journey, all this famous transformation stuff that we're doing. We're not there yet. And another thing that proves that point is sort of the same question about automation levels. Similar picture in many ways. And when you think about it, one of my favorite statements, as you know, that we have been doing shared service GBS work now for 30 plus years. And the main point in shared services really from the beginning was to automate as much as possible. That's what it's all about. And there are all these tools out there that you can use. Don't even need to get into any version of AI, but even before that, there was a lot of automation options. And still, we're only sort of not even halfway done, right? 1/4 done, if you look at this. So there's certainly a lot of work that we still need to put into GBS. So, if you combine this with the initial slide about GBS being a sustainable model and staying with us for a while, all of these slides we've seen up to now, they tell us that it is working, we are advancing, but we're not sort of close to being done, rather somewhere sort of 1/4 to half of the road. And in terms of targets in GBS, there's different things that people can sort of select in these research pieces. And if you compare over the years, it's quite interesting that cost or efficiency, depending on how you ask the question, has been on top of the list for every single year, the last 3 years. And it's logical because if you would go back for a longer period of time, you would see that whenever times are difficult, so let's say there's a lot of crises, wars, other things going on, people sense that there's a lot of risk, and therefore they're mitigating risk, and then they focus a lot on cost-related topics, which makes sense from a decent business person point of view. That's what you should do. If times get better, we're likely to see costs drop a little bit on this list, but cost is always number 1, 2, or 3. It actually never drops out of the top 3. And here's one of our favorite slides because you can't see anything, and we have a pretty big screen here, but we still struggle to see anything on this screen. But the point of the slide really is just to show you that it is a long list of different scope that people have in their GBS. And the list gets longer and longer every year. And on top of the list, you always see the same sort of finance-based transactional processes, P2P, OTC, R2R, they are typically on top of the list in some order. I think, Dan, you sometimes ask why the percentages up there are not close to 100, for example, P2P. I mean, doesn't everybody who's doing finance have P2P on it? Yes. If this slide was based on finance activity only, we would see P2P at 99%. But because this is holistic, cross-functional, there are, of course, IT centers or there are HR centers, and therefore the number cannot be anywhere close to 100. So that has to do with the sort of measurement approach. So another interesting piece, I am actually quite surprised about this result, is that a lot of people are moving out of the traditional transactional back office scope, and I would assume it's based on the fact that it works. They think that this is a model we can utilize also in areas closer to core business, and they're moving into that area. And you can see here that quite a lot of people are already doing it or thinking about it. Big majority, actually. Who does the GBS operation report to? Now, that is mainly interesting for the person who runs GBS, right? Because they might have some idea about who they want to report to. But what it also tells us as an overall picture is that there's quite a lot of GBS who are now reporting to C-level people, and even 11% to the CEO, which this is group CEO, not a business CEO. And that again is sort of an indirect description of how relevant GBS operation is within the overall enterprise, and most likely relates to also the previous discussion about, for example, scope, maturity, and scope being sort of covering also things closer to core business. If you're running only an accounting center for one region, how likely would it be that you would be reporting to the CEO? Very unlikely. And you remember 30 years ago when we started these things, the original transactional accounting centers, they reported to a corporate controller or head of accounting or something, who then reported to a C-level person. So GBS has obviously become much more relevant within an organization.
And it's only even in recent years, a lot of GBS leaders have been reporting to chief accounting officer or corporate controller. So it's moving along in a very positive way.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of number of centers, you might remember that when we started, I mean, most people are younger, so they don't remember, but the history is that 30 years ago when we started.
30 years ago when the book was written?
The idea was to standardize across the globe, and then you had a footprint and you tried to consolidate into as few locations as possible. And you ended up as a global company having, say, 3 to 6 locations. And the idea was to then move everything into those, and that's it. Nowadays, we see an opposite trend in the sense that people are actually looking for new locations for a list of reasons. One is that technology is more scalable, especially downwards, so you can run smaller centers very efficiently. You might want to tap into different labor markets because of skill capability issues that you sometimes encounter. You might also have business reasons like new businesses or growth into different markets where you weren't present, or maybe you had a global footprint, but you still had some white spots on your map, and you're covering those now with a specific center for that. So you can see here that in any year, the number of answers for increase is bigger than for decrease. So while some people might still be decreasing their footprint, most people are increasing, means opening new centers in new locations. And then outsourcing is a constant topic of discussion, and some people like it and others don't, and most people have a fairly, let's say, clear view on this. Either they love it or hate it, which is funny because when you look at the statistics, then we find that while 80% approximately of companies have a captive model, they still use outsourcing for something. So ultimately, almost everybody's model is hybrid in the sense that they would have some outsourcing, activity-based, process-based, business unit-based, geography-based, function-based, something. And it makes a lot of sense to utilize somebody else for areas where they are better than you are. I mean, why would you not do that? And if we look at this slide, you can see we measure this year after year. At least on a volume basis, we see growth. We predict growth because there's no other data that we have that would tell us anything else. And here's a list of locations. We did, Josh, I think we did 5 location-related pieces in SSON Research in the last 2 years. And this slide basically gives you a list of countries that people said they're interested in. So that doesn't mean anything specific, right? So it could mean they have an assessment going on, a project going on, they're looking into a new location, something like that. But at least these are the locations they said they are interested in. And without going through this in detail, but you can see that these lists are not exactly the same as you would have if you had the most popular locations listed by, for example, number of centers or number of FTEs working there or something like that. So there's more competition. There's a lot of locations on this slide, and you can see that people, while they still prefer India, Poland, and so on, are looking into other options for the reasons we just mentioned. And then when times are difficult, there's a lot of risk. And if we analyze what kind of risk people are worried about, we can see on top of the list is cost or economic reasons. It often is number one. Some years, previous years, for example, we had talent very high. This is, we all remember this skill capability discussion that we had. Suddenly after COVID, everybody had disappeared. I still don't know where they went, to the beach or something, but we just couldn't find them. And just a few million people missing shakes up the system enough for everybody to be looking for skills and capabilities. You can see now that the talent workforce piece has improved in the sense that we've come from 41 to 22%, which means that actually supply has improved a little bit. Demand is still high. The problem is still there, but it's not the biggest problem anymore. It's just the third biggest problem. Technology, again, has increased sort of as a risk topic because, as we know, we have all versions and flavors of AI that we can and should use, and not everybody knows how to do this. So while there's opportunity, there's also risk. And then on the bottom, you can see the political crisis measurement. I remember the first research piece on this topic. I think we started with 2% or something like that, so very small number. Some people said they are looking at it, but not changing their decisions yet. If you relate this slide, for example, with the country list, I do think that some people are starting to include it, not necessarily make decisions based on this, but include it into their assessments. And here's one of our favorite best practices that that Dan, you also worked a lot on, right? Process ownership and GPO concepts. I think this is one of the best practices in terms of what you can do with it if you have a good implementation. Funny enough, basically 80–90% of companies use some version of end-to-end process ownership, but most of them tell us that they don't get much out of it. So I would argue it still is mainly a problem of the implementation, not of the concept. Within the concept, there's a lot of things that we could talk about. Don't go into all those details. We need a workshop to do that. But one point that I would like to point out here is sort of the difference between the yellow and the black bar here. So the yellow is what people normally do. They try to look within their GBS for people that they could nominate into a GPO role. Sometimes you can't find them, and then you need to go outside. But you could also go outside on purpose, and you could look for somebody who's owning that part of your end-to-end process, which is not within GBS. So let's say in PTP, somebody owns procurement and it's outside. So why not take the procurement lead and make that person?
And it's a smart move for win hearts and minds.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So that could be sort of a practical idea. And you can see the black bar here has grown over the years. Initial slides we did on this, we didn't even have this black bar on because it was so small, but now we see that it's quite a relevant idea or component of the solution.
And what's interesting about this topic as well is, although it's one of the most dominant themes in GBS, it's also one which has the most divergent set of views about what it actually means.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of work to be done here. So yeah, it's a fascinating piece of research.
And then if we move to people, talent, skills as a topic. So this is an overview of a few select skills. We have a long list of skills that we measure, but these are interesting in the sense that we see these grow in relevance year after year. And if you think about problem solving, you wouldn't think of problem solving as being a big issue, but obviously it is, because over half the companies say they're prioritizing that.
And also the problems we're facing are much more complex and nuanced than they used to be. So it's a much more challenging area.
I would argue it's more about the environment we're in, less about people not being as capable as we used to be when we were young, right? And stakeholder engagement.
Were we ever young? I don't know.
Stakeholder engagement, of course, actually is communication in reality, isn't it? You would think that there's a lot of people who are good at that, but but I think we again need more of that, and therefore there's a higher need for that. And then empathy I like a lot, because it's, if you have a long list of 20, 30 skills, empathy is one of those skills that you cannot really teach people. It's need to have that when you hire them, and therefore I would always make sure that the recruiter, mine internally or external, whatever, looks for empathy, because we need a little bit more of it, especially in these environments with 5 generations working next to each other.
Absolutely.
This is something.
But
really
also, Deborah Cox did an excellent article a week or so ago talking about execution, talking about XQ, the execution quotient to compare with EQ, as the emotional intelligence. And I would actually put that up here as well. Execution is a skill and a habit which is not as available as you might expect. So I think that's another big one for us.
So I think with that, we sort of end the part with the 84.2% of statistics that I just made up.
Amazing.
Pretty good, huh? And for those who don't know the Caterpillar story, I'll tell the whole story from the beginning. For the other ones, there's an addition to it. So you know that the transformation journey we're all on is, transformation means metamorphosis. That's the original Greek word, right? You know that you had Old Greek in school, right?
No.
No?
I was Greek.
Oh, you was.
I'm that old. Methuselah.
So what transformation actually means, and this is not my invention, right, with the old story, but is the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. That's what we mean by transformation. So it's not transition or anything like that. It's transformation. It's something completely different. Unfortunately, what most companies think it is this: we just take the caterpillar and make it faster, right? And then, of course, in the time of Gen AI, it might look something like this,
That's hallucinations for you.
That could be a hallucination. And of course, now we're getting into agentic AI. So the question is, what does it look like with agentic AI? So we figure that maybe it is something like this, with the caterpillars and the elephant all working together. Still
a little bit of hallucination, but a big army of agentic skateboarding caterpillars.
So with that said, Dan, I'll hand it over to you for some.
Great. So, but just before we get into the wrap up, Josh is going to take a quick dive into the data, but slightly more safely than he was doing here on his holidays. I shall just make sure we can get to. Over to you, Josh. It's all yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dan. So yeah, my role today, I'm going to very quickly give you an overview of where all the data that Tom's talked us through today has come from, and then give you a quick run through of the Research Analytics website. So if you don't know SSON Research and Analytics, we are the research arm of SSON, and we are constantly surveying shared service and GBS professionals to be able to provide the latest trends as we've gone through today. So all of this data is available through our State of the Industry report and through the website that you can see on the screen right now. There's a huge amount here, and I just wanted to highlight some of the key areas which are available by the website. So on the screen right now, you can see our metric benchmarker tool. The majority of people reach out to us are wanting to understand how they are performing against their peers. Where can they improve? And this is what you can see here on the screen right now. So we have one metric here, so AP exception rate. And on the screen, you can see where the medians fall, the top quartile and the bottom quartile as well. And here you can also filter by industries and locations, enabling you to select the peer groups that you want to benchmark against. So this is really critical to help, as I said, shared service GBS organizations identify where they're already doing well and where those opportunities to focus their attention on. Moving on from here, I also wanted to very quickly show you our location assessment tool. So earlier, Tom was speaking about the fact that a certain percentage of you are interested in opening up new centres, and also there's a huge number of centres which are, or locations which are being explored that maybe you didn't explore before. So if I just very quickly pull up a city here to look at, and then in the City Cube tool, you have data on over 3,000 cities globally, and you can go through and look at things like talent availability. So what's the talent look like there? What are the cost metrics as well? So this enables you to help with your location strategy, understanding where are potential locations that you could set up centres, as well as exploring or evaluating where you currently set up. So those are two of the key elements that are available through the research analytics. And then on top of that, we have all of our industry reports. The data Tom has gone through today is all available through a variety of different reports under our workbooks and also our research insights reports. But here we deep dive into a huge number of different topics, and not just providing you with the data, but getting experts like Tom and some of our other GBS experts to actually analyse the data itself. So that's just a very quick overview. I'd love to speak with more of you, so please feel free to reach out if you do want to find out a little bit more, and I'll hand over to Dan now to go through the rest.
Thanks, Josh. So those metrics cover all of the processes, right? The finance process, yes, the HR process, exactly. IT process is really, really broad, a broad church there, so worth looking at. So thanks, thanks, Josh, for that. So that was Josh on his holidays. Mm-hmm. And now, if you want a copy, so what Tom described has been documented in this report, and it's come from the analytics tools that Josh has shown you. So if you want a copy of either of those, drop Josh an email to that email address, and you'll get it as well through in follow-up email. So if you want any of that, you should get hold of it, because it's very, very powerful stuff. Just quickly coming to a conclusion on all this, and as I say, do pop questions into the panel if you have thoughts about this. Even if we don't get time to do them live, we will get back to you afterwards. So these are the themes that Tom talked through. There's some really interesting stuff there, and it's probably sparked your imagination a little bit. And obviously, we talked about the operating model, naming and branding, and this whole issue of end-to-end processes in the GPO, and evolution, digitization, and maturity, talent. And then this whole kind of how we view transformation, and it's a little bit of fun here, but it is true that we often think of transformation really as automation, and it's not about that. It's broader than that. Tom made a great point that we've been doing shared services in GBS for 30+ years, and change happens very slowly, because over 30 years we haven't really got that much more mature. We haven't automated that much more, maybe, but it also happens very suddenly. And one question that I wonder is, the big change does happen slow and sudden, but I wonder whether that big change is turns into as positive a business impact as it should do. So we're going through a big AI wave at the moment, and that's been relatively sudden in the past couple of years in terms of the take-up. But again, we've got to be very careful we actually deliver business value, rather than just spend a lot of time getting excited about the new technologies. And of course, with AI, it's a little bit lighthearted here, but it astonished me going into the supermarket to realize I can now get a toothbrush with AI, which after examining all of the bristles on the toothbrush and realizing they didn't have independent sensory capabilities, I realized the AI was all in the marketing and not in the product. But there you go, that's life, right? But of course, we're now into the world of AI agents. So the little lonely agent in a library here, but of course, we've got an agentic army now, but we've still got to keep them happy. So you can see here, we've got morale to deal with. One of them looks rather insanely happy. Probably needs somebody to have a chat to them. But some of them not so happy. But anyway, that's your agentic workforce. But the serious point I'm trying to make is, whenever we go through a technological wave, we tend to think that the new technology has replaced all the other tools in the toolbox. It hasn't. It's just we have a new tool in the toolbox, which is great. All the old tools are still valid, and you will still have a vast array of automation and augmentation opportunities with the tools you already have. And just be careful that when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And coming to the point that Tom made about end-to-end processes and GPOs, and the fact that this is a real top strategy for every GBS organization. You can see here, everyone is saying, 87% of organizations, leadership are saying end-to-end process integration is a top priority, which is great. But as we already touched on, the way we do that isn't always clear. There's a lot of differing views about what those things actually mean, even what end-to-end means. And I would encourage you to think carefully, because I think the biggest impact or biggest enabler for transformation is to look end-to-end. Break down the silos, not physically, but break down the silo thinking of end-to-end cycles, and we can make a massive change by doing that in all of the big business cycles: revenue cycle, spend, product, people, the whole thing. And we've got to understand the end-to-end cycle, and comes back to the point of, we've got to be curious enough and put enough effort in to understand the whole cycle, because none of us understand it all, because we tend to come from one particular area. So the key point here with transformation is, if you don't understand the end-to-end process, you're not automating, you're not enabling with AI, you're just gambling, you're just hoping. So we've got to get that fixed, which is why the end-to-end process thing is so key. Otherwise, all we're going to do is apply AI to small tasks. So one of the things we've been talking a lot about recently is thinking outside in. If you want to avoid the watermelon KPIs, look at that picture at the bottom, start thinking across the cycle, beyond the things that GBS delivers, and you see the little eye looking at one of the services, but we've got to look across the whole process. How do we streamline it? How do we make it better for the customer? How do we make it more efficient and faster? And that is really, comes under some terms that we talk about outside in thinking and think like a CFO. And if we do that, then we're going to make significant changes. There's aggregation and marginal gains, rapid changes that collectively have a massive transformational impact. All of this topic on end-to-end processes and the GPO, there's a whole kind of enablement program, a set of workshops, and you can look at this at your leisure, but there's a lot to cover there for anybody who's interested. The fact is, as you can tell, in 30 years, there's been a lot going on in GBS and shared services, but it's very clear there are no quick fixes or easy hacks. And even now with AI, there still aren't any quick fixes or easy hacks. There's a great quote here from someone who wasn't even in GBS or technology. He was a surgeon. In fact, he still is. And he was a Nobel Prize winner. And that quote relates to everything we do, and it's absolutely right on the money. So worth thinking about. So that's what we've talked through. As I say, we're pretty much up to time. Thank you for your time. I think we should just, we did pour some of the wine. We let it air a little. This has come all the way from Germany, but it's not German wine.
It's a grown there.
It is definitely not German wine. It's Portuguese one, so cheers. So thank you. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you, Tom.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Remember, you've got the book, or the survey that you can get from Josh directly, free of charge. The book on the right, of course, you have to pay for from Amazon, but you can get one signed from the man himself. So with that, if you've got any questions or requests, Josh can help you with, you email either of us, I'll forward it to Josh if it comes to me. But if you want to know about that GPO end-to-end process piece, if you want to know anything about the research, speak to Josh or speak to me. But thank you for joining us. I'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.